Okay. So other than that, we have a quorum and
Yes, I have an attendance. Tony, Jeremy, Nicole, Jim, Sean, and Jack.
so I can't recall, do we typically make a motion to excuse those that were unable?
We do,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so I'll look for that motion if anybody would care to do that.
I can make that motion.
Sounds like a motion and support from Nicole, I believe. A motion from Jim, was it?
Jack.
Okay, so there's a motion and support to excuse Karen, Mike, and Greg from the DDA meeting, July 23rd, 2020. Is there any questions, concerns? If not, all in favor by aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Is there any opposition? Thank you. We'll move right into public comment. Kyle, any public comment or any public in the waiting room that or with us?
No, at this point, it is just MEDC and the consultants in the waiting room.
Okay. We want to, we have our consent agenda. Let's see. Well, I guess the Smith Group is right after the consent agenda. So under the consent agenda, we have minutes from 6/11, bills for approval from 6/6 to 7/19, financial reports as of 6/30/2020. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Sean, motion. Is there support for that motion?
Second.
Jeremy, so there's a motion and support to approve the consent agenda. All in favor by aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Carries unanimous. We'll move right into the downtown plan presentation, part 2 from the Smith Group. And Rebecca, I'll let you tee that up if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Kyle will be letting those folks in, and as he's doing that, I'll just give a brief introduction. Last month we had Bob Doyle and Kaylee Hines with Smith Group. They're joining us again today. Hi guys. And then we also have this time with us Tom Brown from Nelson Nygaard. He did the parking update portion of our study, and Rob Bassigalupi from Mission North, and he will be talking today more about the transportation and public policy components of the project. And so I see Bob is here. Okay, is everybody accounted for? No, Tom?
Should be coming up, I imagine.
Did you want to wait for Tom or?
Well, we can probably get started, Becky. I have the first couple of slides are ones that I'm covering anyway. There's Rob.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Sorry, I'm late. I was actually in the wrong Zoom room.
And also, before I turn it over to you guys, I just wanted to acknowledge that Christopher Germain and Jen Tucker from the MEDC are with us as well. Good morning, guys. And with that, I'll turn it over to our consultant team.
Okay, now I just got to figure out how to share my screen. So good morning, everybody. How are things in Marquette? I heard you had much cooler temperatures there than yesterday than we've been having. My wife was quite jealous. Today we have an abbreviated presentation. We're going to cover transportation and public policy. When we met last month, we talked about the column on the left, improvements to the public realm. And so we're going to cover these other two topics in short order. So the first topic we want to talk about is improving the non-motorized network. I think it's pretty well known that Marquette is a leader in the state and in the region in the development of multi-use trails. But one of the things that we're thinking about as it relates specifically to downtown is how you can translate that into a stronger network of on-street bike facilities that then connect the neighborhoods and campus to downtown. And so what's on the right is a map from your own transportation plan, which was completed in the last 3 years.
Excuse me,
And-
Bob.
Yes.
Sorry, it's Jack. Would it be possible for you to change the view to, I think it's presentation. It's like,
Oh,
there's a preview. Well, no problem. Thank you. Just, I can see it better that way. Thank you.
I think this happened last time, and last time I had the same moment of like, okay, how do I do that?
Maybe scroll to the bottom right there. Yeah. The button left right there.
Did that do it? No.
What is the 3 dots button pull up, Bob?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Hide presenter view.
Thank you. Does that work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a guess. I guessed right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're just switching over to Microsoft Teams as a way of navigating files and communicating. And so the learning curve for a guy at 58 is a little slower than, say, Kaylee. So still getting used to new things. Anyway, so in the light blue, you have what the Transportation Master Plan called out as street bike facilities, which could be bike lanes. It could be you're sharing the street with traffic, so you're creating a shared street, or it could be that you have a off street bike path or on street two-way bike path. And then in green, of course, you have your existing mixed use paths. So right now in dashed green are the 2 paths you have that come through downtown, but you have nothing that connects, and in dashed blue you have bike lanes that are downtown. But this section in the middle on 3rd Street is one that we think you should consider very carefully in terms of what it could become in the non-motorized network to fully link the neighborhoods to the north into downtown and eventually to the south as well. So there's a couple ways of doing that, and we don't have to decide that today. We're just offering them as different ways of looking at it. We've measured the width of the road, and north of Washington Street and south of Spring Street, the road is between 40 and 42 feet wide. And there are a couple different ways you could do that. You could have a bike path on either side, a bike lane that is buffered because you have enough room to do that. Right now in that zone, there's parking on one side of the street pretty typically. So there's a little excess capacity in the pavement. We've left the lanes at 12 feet downstate here where we have less snow. We advocate those be about 10.5 feet, but I think 10.5 feet is a little tight for Marquette. Anyway, another way of looking at it would be to have bike lanes that don't have a buffer but are still bike lanes, and you retain the parking on one side of the street. And then lastly, between Washington and Spring on 3rd, you have a little less pavement. You don't have any, currently have any parking in that zone in a significant way. And so you could easily put in bike lanes. So that's something we think you guys ought to consider in the master plan. Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about the findings you came up with under the topic of training?
Yeah, so this is something that came up in several of the focus groups, especially the ones, I was in a lot of the focus groups talking about parking. But I think in every other group and some of the parking groups, the idea of some kind of shuttle circulator service connecting the northern campus to downtown, hopefully traversing the 3rd Street district along the way, was a common theme with a lot of enthusiasm. And, and some frustration that, this was something that was definitely starting to be talked about when we did the last parking management plan in 2012. And obviously nothing has really happened, despite there being a lot of vested interests and people at least suggesting that they'd be willing to contribute to the cost. So this was something that we talked with Bob and Rebecca about, this looking like a real priority to add to our focus area along with parking. So we dove a bit more deeply into this and, tapped our transit planners to figure out basically what could you do in terms of headways. That's the times between, basically the amount of time between bus arrivals at a particular stop, with one bus connecting these two areas, and including in an alternative. Several folks at meetings, talked about if this could also connect to the new hospital, that would help them, and they might have a particular vested interest because they're having some employee parking challenges, and possibly related to that, stopping off at their old parking garage where there is capacity, and providing kind of a park and ride service to the new hospital. And so what we looked at, was similar to the last time we looked at this, which was more conceptual. There's certainly an obvious, at least the core route is fairly obvious. It seems very viable. We looked at 20 to 25 minute headways for a 1 vehicle service. So again, you want to get to 15 minutes or below if you want to attract riders who won't look at a schedule. So non-commuters, people who are not overly familiar with the area. So students, can get used to 20, 25 minutes, people who know the area, people who are regular visitors or employees, business owners, but it's harder to attract visitors. So one of the alternatives we looked at was running 2 buses during the peak. And so we provided some cost estimates, and I think it came to about, for 1 vehicle, about $800 per day for a pretty decent span of service. And so, add maybe 20% to that if you ran a second vehicle in the peaks, which would cut those headways down and make it more visitor friendly. So certainly a path toward a viable option, but I think the big challenge here is making that leap from, sounds like something we'd invest in, to actually starting to invest in a plan that could make this start to look real, and figuring out the operator. Is this MarkTran, or it sounded like they were interested when we met with groups. They expressed that MarkTran had not been interested in being the operator of this. And so there was a sense that another provider would have to be identified. And our research into that is there are not a lot of for-hire shuttle operators in the region that would make that an easy choice to make. And as we talked with folks, and I think Rebecca has heard this as well, MarkTran has expressed interest in this, and it wasn't sure how they'd given the impression that they weren't. So that might be a little bit more promising, certainly identifying an operator that knows what they're doing and that it is a known entity in the area would reduce that barrier. Next slide. Another key area.
Excuse me, before we go on
Yep.
to that next slide, when you mentioned headway, sorry if it was on the slide, I couldn't see it, but are you talking about all the way around? Is that what the headway means, or is it from one end to the
means
other?
if you arrive at a given bus stop, this bus would come every 20 to 25 minutes.
Okay.
It does, because you are talking about a single vehicle service. It does, that is based on the amount of time estimated to make the loop.
Okay.
So they're basically the same, though that's the idea that if at key times you ran 2 vehicles, you could cut that in half. So the route length would stay the same, but you'd get 2 vehicles coming.
Right. Okay.
And
Thank you.
hopefully regular intervals. Yeah.
I
And so go ahead.
was going
Was
to
there-
ask if there are any other questions related to the transit before we move on.
So, and again, I think, you know, the hospital, Northern are particularly interested. Oh, and one thing I didn't touch upon, there is a bullet point on this slide about it, but one of the things we definitely heard from some of the groups was the challenge of affordable housing to support growth in the medical industry. And my sense is that some of that affordable housing is around the 3rd Street district, and having that easy connection with the shuttle to the hospitals and to the Northern campus might make some of that those housing options more attractive. And certainly this should benefit the 3rd Street district, bringing students more frequently with fewer cars to their area.
If I could just add one thought to this discussion about the proposed route, and that is related to helping attract visitors off season. We have a bullet point later on in the slideshow about that. And one of the great things about this route is it would really help serve that purpose by virtue of the fact that it goes in the vicinity of 4 hotels, and you've got almost 300 hotel rooms within a block of the route. And then you've got the Northern Michigan University event spaces, which would be the Northern Center and the Berry Event Center, which are essentially right on the route or within a block or 2 of the route. So having a service like this would really go a long way in serving conferences and conventions, especially if you had the ability to increase the headways, as Tom was saying. Visitors are more inclined to ride a more frequent route, but either way, it would definitely go a long way in helping that effort.
Okay, well, let's keep
Thanks,
moving
Rob.
then.
And so, as Bob was pointing to before, this is obviously cycling is popular in the region and in Marquette, throughout downtown even. Is a hearty cycling culture, roughly all season, but I'm sure I'd see fewer bikes. I'm sure I saw fewer bikes when I was there in January than when I was there in August, but enhance, some opportunities to enhance that and encourage bike mobility. Not really to, I don't sense that you have a parking supply problem. Our sense is that the supply is roughly adequate, but obviously you're facilitating growth. There's opportunity to transform the downtown with more housing and other uses. And so every little bit that you can move into non-driving modes for downtown commuters, downtown visitors during the busy season, that frees up parking spaces to facilitate that growth. And since there is enthusiasm for this mode anyway, we're not moving against headwinds. So some obvious opportunities emphasize enhanced sheltered bike parking. The picture there are some racks that are in the Bluff Street ramp. They've been there for several years. Putting that on a map so people know where that is, so they know I can commute by my bike. It's not going to be sitting out in the rain, so I'm going to do that rather than drive because it's nice. And showing where other similar sheltered, secure bike parking locations are on a map like this, which is from the Calgary Parking Authority. Putting out seasonal bike corrals. Rob can attest to this in Traverse City, Bob in Ann Arbor. Basically takes one parking space, or you can even put some of these in spaces that are not quite big enough for a full vehicle parking space. But in areas where there is high demand, you can basically get 10 people on 10 bikes into a space that would hold one car. And they do tend to be visitors. So it does bring, it does emphasize visitor accommodations, whereas on any given day, that parking space may be taken by the owner of the store it's in front of. So some of those ideas that have been proven successful in other Michigan cities, we think certainly could be enhanced and expanded in Marquette. And then into the parking part of the parking management plan update. Starting with supply, identifying some opportunities to add supply. So one of the opportunities that I think is just ready for launch is particularly in the 3rd Street district, is we're seeing more and more cities where the owners of private lots that sit empty at night and on the weekends contact the local pay-by-phone vendor. In fact, I've seen in Detroit where private lot owners have contacted a pay-by-phone vendor that wasn't even the one that the city uses for the meters. Detroit uses Passport. I've seen Park Mobile, which is that green sign in the picture on the top right. It was a vacant office building, and they were basically leasing out their spaces by the hour using pay-by-phone. This picture is from Charlotte, North Carolina, where we talked to the owner of this lot. He was making $1,500 a month by charging $5 evenings and weekends to park in his lot using pay-by-phone. And the money is passed directly from the pay-by-phone service to the lot owner. Obviously, I don't know if you'd be able to charge $5 a night in 3rd Street, but this, you have pay-by-phone, you have a good vendor. They're versed in doing this in other cities. So you've got a ready partner right there to try to pilot this, which is actually happening in Kalamazoo right now after Rob and I completed a study there. It's just a prime parking lot that was attached to a bank, dozens of great parking spaces, and they're now charging, I think, $3 after 6 to park there. Other opportunities, redundant driveways. This is a picture of the often talked about parking lot with the wooden nickel billboard. Several driveways accessing this parking lot. Closing the one on Washington would recapture some potential parking spaces, and just a block toward the lakefront from here is all meters, well utilized, very convenient customer parking spaces. Just simply closing that driveway could really transform this really important block of Washington Boulevard and still provide full access to that lot and push more of the in and out, turning movements onto the side street rather than on Washington, where you want to have a bit more predictable, calm traffic anyway. And then obviously something that we've been talking about and working with Rebecca and Rob and Bob is, we've been doing some pro forma or rough high level pro formas on what would it take to fund a new parking structure. Comparing what revenue you're making on parking now to what it would cost to build and maintain and pay the debt service on a new structure. And then finally, more capacity. And this again is something we recommend to all of our cities. The picture with the commercial loading zone is, picture this as a commercial loading zone that would typically be, this is a loading zone, don't park here. This sign is an emerging practice where you recognize that the loading demand tapers off, or you can encourage it to taper off toward the midday and transition toward metered parking, so that it's not, well, one size fits all. This is a commercial loading zone, the parking's over there. You can flip the uses and try to accommodate those uses when they're in peak demand. And that can gain you some on-street parking spaces when you most need them. Any questions on this slide? Okay. And then demand management. This is the fun stuff, charging people for parking. Nobody loves it, but the meters that you have put in over the last 8 years are working well. Nobody loves paying for something that they think they can get for free, but they do love available parking right outside the coffee shop that they're going to. And most of the people that we talk to if they weren't just flat out opposed to paid parking ever, recognized that these were working, that you did have free or cheaper alternatives that have pulled away some of the demand from particularly Washington, and freed up parking spaces when things are busy, which is much more customer friendly, and you're not charging an outrageous amount of money. And the move toward digital meters and pay by phone makes it easy to pay for parking without having a pocket full of quarters. So building upon that success, extending that into the 3rd Street district in particular, and taking the same approach to your parking permits. You know, one of the things that we heard, again, there's a sense that overall there's enough off-street parking to meet the midday weekday parking demand when all the commuters, downtown employees are there, and the lunchtime visitors are there. There's still enough parking, but people say, you know, I have my parking space. I get there in the morning, I go to lunch, I have to park somewhere else when I come back, somewhere else further away. And if it's raining, you know, that's really frustrating. And so the idea is to take the same approach using pricing to charge more for those, say, 3 high demand parking lots, so that you do encourage more people to use that discounted permit price as an incentive to, well, I'm just going to get a permit to the 2nd tier zone, or, you know, I'm going to pay a premium for this lot because that's the only place I want to park. And hopefully that demand that's shifted to some of the less popular lots means I get that space when I come back after the lunch hour. These last 2, and one of the other things that emerged from one of the focus groups we met with, some of the things we were hearing about parking in the evening is, and for employees that are showing up for that evening rush, I think there is opportunity to provide a discounted late afternoon permit for evening shift employees. So say after 3 o'clock, when those folks have come back from their lunch hour and found their space, but some employees are starting to leave and there's more capacity, offer a discounted permit for those evening shift employees, just as a way to make sure that downtown jobs are as accessible as possible. And finally, extending meter enforcement into the evenings, particularly when demand merits. I'm not sure where you're at in terms of how busy your downtown is right now as COVID evolves. But when things return to normal and as you start to see the economy shift toward restaurants, bars, other gathering places, it's really becomes essential to bring that availability that meters provide along Washington and your other primary blocks to those evening times, so that when I'm excited to go to dinner on a Thursday night, the parking space that I expected to use is available if I'm willing to pay at the meter. And if I'm not, you know, I know where I'm going to go anyway. I'm not circling the block because I'm surprised when I show up and downtown's busy and no parking is available. Any questions on this?
I would just,
one more on parking management. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that a lot of these recommendations are described in detail, or will be described in detail in our draft report, and so there'll be opportunity for everyone to kind of take what they're reading and seeing today and get some background to it. And so what we're trying to do today is really just introduce these ideas, and we can have some follow-up discussions once everything starts to congeal together a little bit.
Right, that's a good point. And
phone disconnected.
And the details include phasing. So guidance on, you know, this is an immediate priority versus, you know, some of the strategies or things that are more medium-term priorities or things to keep in mind for later. Last slide on parking management, looking at operations and technology improvements. This is something the DDA was already looking into when we started, but replacing the meters that you have as funding becomes available. There's a lot of debate about, you know, should we stick with the single space meters or should we move toward pay stations and kiosks? Things that move back and forth in the industry and trends over the 16 years I've been doing these parking studies. And I think there is, especially in northern cities or cities with a lot of snow and maintenance issues in the winter, there is a move toward kiosks and pay stations. You simply have fewer machines to take care of, to clear out from the snow, etc. And when we talk to other Michigan cities, they strongly encouraged that there was a lot of cost benefits to making the investments to choose pay stations over the single space meters. Transitioning to digital permits, again, is also something that Rebecca was talking to Passport, your pay by phone vendor, about. This is something that can just really bring your permit system to a whole new reality. You can be a lot more nimble, a lot more dynamic. So I can choose, so for example, I can choose to pay the premium permit for the Bluff Street ramp for a month or two, and that's a priority for me, and switch to a discounted lot when I don't mind riding or walking from a more distant parking lot. You can provide day permits. You can provide a permit for someone who's going to be there for a week. There's just a lot of things you can do when they become digital, which means essentially I log into the system, I pay for a permit, and my license plate becomes that permit, and the enforcement is through my license plate. Use a license plate reader. It goes into the system and it tells you whether I'm legally parked or not. This adds a lot of other knock-on benefits, including tracking utilization consistently. As long as you're doing those plate reads, you're getting a data feed of parking occupancy, which can allow you to better track, gee, we've offered this discounted permit. Is anyone actually using that lot? And if more people are using it, how many? How effective has that been? And are things getting better in the lot where we are trying to free up more capacity? Another opportunity, particularly in downtowns like Marquette, where you still have the traditional, the people that have been coming to downtown as a tradition for decades. I mean, it's amazing, very heartening to see that you still have a bingo supply store on your main street. So one of the things that you can offer with pay by phone is a digital validation. Validation systems are a very popular idea, but kind of a headache to administer. You can actually do it through pay by phone, where you can send out a code that allows your customers to negate the cost of their parking, or to reimburse them for what they have paid for the parking, whether that was on street or off. Any questions on those? All right.
All right. As Tom alluded to, there's been discussion about potential for parking deck expansion or creation in order to mitigate the loss of parking for lots that are being developed. And so we've identified 3 locations that have the dimensional capacity and the grades in order to make a lot, a deck work. And those include building over the existing 2-level deck, and then potential small decks at 2-level deck at Washington and 3rd. And then lastly, building a deck on the Spring Street. And so if we look at those in a little more detail, I think option A is to, again, add a 3rd level onto the existing Bluff Street deck. We would, in order to maximize the capacity of the deck, we may look at, building a ramp over the alley. So you come off of grade on Bluff Street across here, and have what they call a speed ramp in order to get you up to that 3rd level, which many facilities have. You have about 120 spaces per level. So if you add a 3rd level, you could gain potentially another 120 spaces. You may lose a couple here and there for circulation. The second option that we looked at was on Spring Street, and it has the length, running from Spring to Baraga, in order to make ramping work adequately. You can get about 80 spaces per level. So if you went with a 2 or 3 level deck, you're in the range of 160 to 240 spaces. I'm sorry, for 3 or 4 level deck, you could net gain 160 to 240 spaces in that area. And then a little bit, I think, less appealing from an urban planning standpoint is a potential for, but nonetheless, I think worth considering is a deck at Washington and 3rd. And so this would be similar to the deck you have on Bluff Street, which is just 2 levels. You access a lower level from 3rd, you access an upper level off of Washington. And the grades work pretty well for that. And you could gain, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 spaces in that particular part of downtown. So I think these things all have to be weighed. I know there was some ongoing investigation into the structure of the existing Bluff Street deck to see whether or not it could sustain the load of a 3rd level. And I think you need to look at that, and we need to look at where development is likely to occur and how you can best serve your customer base. But you do have some options for the future. So we're going to switch over to talking about municipal policies. And for that, we're going to turn it over to Rob.
All right. So in regards to municipal policies, these, of course, largely came out of the stakeholder discussions. So the first one is supporting efforts to draw more technology businesses to Marquette. You already have, of course, a pretty good collection of technology businesses. You do have a co-working space that is, operating. So that's not something that you need to focus a lot of attention to, but just helping it sustain. I know that it has struggled a little bit in the past, and just being available to help sustain efforts by this co-working space, or perhaps even a second one or a third one, is something that would be valuable. And really what we're talking about is, for example, SBA sometimes offers grants for co-working space in what they consider rural areas, which Marquette would be considered a rural area in their definition. So that's just something that you might be able to help with, being whether it be the DDA or perhaps even the city of Marquette, but just kind of shepherding through an SBA grant if that makes sense for helping out the co-working space if need be. And we've seen this in other communities work pretty well. So, so that's one way you can help. Another way that, isn't actually listed here, but kind of relates to having the best fiber and connectivity network that you can possibly have. You actually have a very good one already, or very good systems in place. You've got fiber availability in downtown Marquette. You've got Northern Michigan University has a wireless network. And perhaps another thing that you could do is just convene all of the partners and get them talking, if they aren't already, to see if there might be some synergy in the future for expanding connectivity in downtown Marquette. And Eric Smith from NMU mentioned that they're looking at 5G wireless, which is pretty exciting. So they're already working on one of the things that came up at the stakeholder meeting, which is, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had 5G in downtown Marquette? Well, apparently NMU is already working on that. So, but just convening those partners and seeing if there might be some additional synergy and opportunities to strengthen that would be a helpful thing. Another thing that we touched on a little bit with the 3rd Street circulator, the bus route, is encouraging more off-season traffic. Obviously, you get the bulk of your traffic in the summertime. You might get a bit during certain parts of the winter, but trying to fill in the gaps between those high traffic times is, of course, helpful for business downtown. And in talking with Travel Marquette and Susan at Travel Marquette, it sounds like you already have great facilities in the Marquette area. You've got a wide variety of facilities, largely, not all of them, but a lot of those are at NMU. And that's where the circulator can help. If you can connect the hotel rooms, certainly the ones that are downtown, with those facilities that are at NMU with a circulator, that can make it a lot easier for a conference to come into town and make all the details work. So supporting that effort for that route is would be very helpful. And then, I mentioned that you already have great facilities, so there's certainly no desperate need to encourage additional conference facilities. But the one thing that we've seen just generally is that there's more corporate training where corporations will go off-site to do specific training. They want to get out of the office, and these facilities have popped up at hotels that are designed for that. And it might be that you have a hotel downtown that might want to pursue that, and the kind of support you could offer would simply be in terms of perhaps a brownfield, having brownfield support for a facility like that. Of course, that would require DDA participation in terms of sharing your TIF. But that would be something that you could at least say, hey, if there's a hotel that wants to add a facility that expands the season, we'd be willing to look at that in terms of a brownfield plan. So the next one is helping retailers. This one, and of course, this came up a lot during the stakeholder meetings, but it's something that you have already in your city strategic plan, and that's conducting a market study. And now with COVID-19 and the dramatic change in retailing, it might be a really good time to do a market study that focused on all aspects of downtown, but specifically on retail. One of the things that folks have been saying about COVID-19 is it's taken these trends in retail, like e-commerce, and it's accelerated them. Of course, every year we saw more retail taking place online and less at bricks and mortar. Well, that's been accelerated by COVID-19. So it might be a good time to think about doing a market study to really evaluate, okay, what are the issues in downtown Marquette, and what are the specific strategies that you could employ to help offset those. And the last one on this list is adopting a development plan for 3rd Street. Again, 3rd Street, was a big focus of stakeholder discussions. This is also something that is in your strategic plan for 2018 to 20. And, I think in the strategic plan, it's called a 3rd Street Sustainability Plan. But that could come in the form of a new development and TIF plan. You don't collect TIF on 3rd Street, and if you were to add that in and start collecting TIF on 3rd Street, that would provide obviously an opportunity for funding down the road to help fund the improvements that you might look for on 3rd Street, such as, we talked at the last meeting about some street and sidewalk improvements and landscaping improvements. There's discussion in the strategic plan about burying power lines. So there's a list of things that you've got already, and establishing TIF on 3rd Street would just give you some dollars down the road to help pay for those things. Is there anything on that last slide anyone wants to talk about? If not, we can go to the next one, which is really just some photo examples. We've already talked about co-working. Obviously, co-working spaces are great because they provide a place for, technology businesses, particularly new ones, to not only have a less expensive place to land but also to have the synergy with other similar businesses to help them grow their business. So they're really important spaces to have in a downtown where you are trying to encourage not just technology businesses, but new businesses in general. They're great to have. And then what we'll talk about on the next slide, but these pictures kind of relate to it, are taking some of your underutilized upper floors that might be on Washington or some of the other streets downtown and converting those to residential. There's probably a very good reason why why that hasn't happened already. And it very well could be that the numbers don't work, that financially it just isn't viable to convert those. But there are programs available to help with that. And one of those is MEDC's Rental Rehab Assistance Program that can help, that actually goes to the owner of the building to help them help pay for the renovations of the space, and it's specifically for rental. So that could really be a great program to help convert some of those spaces over to rental that are underutilized. And actually, if we can go to the next slide, just kind of expanding on that rental rehab program thing. I know that it's been used all over the state. I think Iron Mountain and Sault Ste. Marie recently have used it. So those pictures from the last slide were from Mason. But yeah, it's a really great program that you could use. And really specifically what the DDA could do is help identify those properties that are underutilized, where there are opportunities to apply this program, and then help connect them with the MEDC and see if it's a good match to help to get them to renovate their space. And the other thing that kind of relates more to zoning is offering density bonuses to encourage more residential downtown. Of course, the reason we're talking about more residential downtown, it came up during the stakeholder meetings, but that is a key thing that you can do for your downtown to offset the impact, not certainly of COVID, but also long-term, the impact of e-commerce. As e-commerce eats away at bricks and mortar retail, it makes a lot of sense to have more people living in your downtown to backfill the dollars that are lost through e-commerce. So again, density bonuses are simply where you offer some additional height in return for certain things, and in this case, that thing would be adding more residential space to your downtown.
Okay. Just a couple more slides. Any questions for Rob on the last topic? I will add quickly that the plan will include strategies and funding opportunities for these types of projects that we have outlined, and both existing funds, and we're also tracking very closely the potential stimulus bills that are being considered at the federal level, and one was recently passed by the House, which includes a lot of support for affordable housing and for non-motorized transportation and for redevelopment. So we'll be including that into the draft report. In terms of policy level discussions, we can look at also where do we want to encourage new development to occur in downtown, either through the advocacy of sale of property, of existing parking lots, or just through zoning policy and or support through brownfield programs. And so you've got a lot of opportunities in the downtown where you either have underutilized parcels, parcels that developed years ago that have an excess of parking right up against the street, which create gaps in the shopping and visitor experience. And I think it's a valuable discussion as the plan comes together as to where you as a DDA board want to focus attention on encouraging redevelopment. And of course, you need the necessary ingredients to be successful. You've got to have a willing landowner. You've got to have a market for the product. You have to have willingness for brownfield incentives to go there, potential partnerships with the city and DDA. And then last, you need zoning policies in place, which would encourage that development. So that's something we'll want to think about. We've given it some thought, and we can discuss more in the future. And then our last topic is really just to introduce an idea and let you know that we are looking at zoning in the downtown and the two form-based codes that are used within the DDA district. So you basically have 3 different kinds of zoning right now in the DDA district. Your more traditional standard zoning for the traditional downtown core of Washington and the remaining streets in downtown. And then you've got the waterfront district, and then you've got the 3rd Street district. And we're trying to think about ways of consolidating and making that easier for developers and the municipal employees to sort of manage and use. So that's what we have for today. We have a couple of next steps identified. There's some stakeholders we'd like to meet with, including those that we talked to in January. We'd like to spend some time with city staff, talking a little bit about that zoning and municipal policy side of things. Then we will be firming up our recommendations, preparing an action plan, which will include those funding, potential funding mechanisms that we talked about. And then we would provide the draft master plan to you folks, and then have a session where we can talk about and debate different ideas and what belongs in the plan, what doesn't belong in the plan, what needs to be strengthened, etc. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions people might have.
Hi, Bob. I have a question. This is Tony Ratajski.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to what Tom Brown was saying earlier. He talked about the ramp and the ramp calculations for a bond payback. Is that going to be part of the action plan, or is that something that we'll just discuss further with you and the DDA board?
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've done some financial analysis, and my sense is that would remain more internal facing. So Rebecca has that. Bob and Rob have looked at it, and we're happy to if the board looks at it and has questions or comments, make adjustments. But it's a start toward getting a better understanding of how much of the costs of a structure, and using sort of generic stand-ins for per space construction cost estimates could be carried by parking revenue, including resulting revenue from the new parking that's created. And the idea of using using financing or assuming some increase in TIF revenues that would result from the private investment that would trigger. So the idea is there's no need to build a parking structure to meet today's needs, but assuming that building a structure could catalyze future investments, you could include that potential future revenue as a source for paying down the debt service. So we've put some numbers to that, but I didn't think, usually that's a little sensitive, and because it wasn't a clear cut, like, oh, this could definitely work, or an easy thing to explain, and some hard decisions really that would have to be made, I assume that would stay inward facing, but referenced in the report and the action plan. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you.
Okay.
Bob, this is
Yeah.
Becky. I just have a question with your next steps here. Do you have an estimated time frame for when these things will happen and when we will ultimately review that master plan with the DDA board?
Well, I think that can depend largely on you guys and when you need it and when you would like it. I think we could meet with stakeholders. I think those meetings could be done in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The recommendations on the parking plan are very, very well along. The rest of them are also in good shape. It won't take us more than, I think, 2 or 3 weeks to pull that together. So potentially we could be back in front of you in September with a draft. And so a lot of that depend though on how much you guys want to, other things you have on your plate to get done, right? But we can get a draft to you in September, early September, for at least to start reviewing it and thinking about it and debating it. Does that seem to work, or?
I think that's a realistic time frame, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? I know we covered a lot of ground today. We tried to keep it brief. We were not as successful as we would have liked, but we did cover a lot of ground, and hopefully once you see all of the discussions and recommendations in one place in a draft, it'll allow you to think about it more holistically and give us some good feedback.
Will you be able to share some of today's slides with us? There was a couple of items in there that were a little bit difficult to read even with the larger screen.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I made one change from the version I sent Becky yesterday, so I'll send her a new version of it, a new PDF today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And I'll distribute that to the board as soon as I have that. So,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Well, if you're ready to move on, we can sign off and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Good to see you all again.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Rebecca, back to me to continue on, or do you want to have some discussion?
I would open up to discussion if the board has any comments or questions about the presentation.
A lot to take in, especially with the parking. But I think there's some good ideas there. I like how they want to connect. I feel like we have a really big biking community, and I like the idea of connecting that to bring people more downtown and make it accessible. I also really like the transit route idea. I think if that could happen in the future, that would be a really cool thing to see in this town. But I think we all know that parking's that kind of like blooming overhead issue. To really figure that out. And he made a good point too about what we decide to do now really affects what the future is. So it's, I think, trying to think about what we're going to need in the future when we try to budget and spend all this money now. That's something to keep relative while we discuss this.
I agree. That's a very good point. And in our next agenda item is the Bluff Street ramp. And so I do have some other conversation about that, but I'll defer in case there is any other conversation here about the presentation before we move forward.
Rebecca, I like the presentation, and I think there's some things that we could take action on very soon and start a discussion on. There's also items in there that, how do we fund them and how do they get done? Really great ideas. But I think that's part of our future discussion as well. I think there's some really great opportunities in that bus route that they talked about. If we could work with Mark Tran to do that, I think it would be maybe a way to expand some of our business opportunities downtown with people accessing them. But one point he did make was there's high concentrations of times of people that need that bus route, but nothing was said about the 2 a.m. crowd, and I think that would actually help if we had somebody that would run that bus route after the restaurants and bars closed down for the college students to get back or whomever. So
that's also a good point, Tony. And personally, I am very interested in the pursuing of the development and TIF plan for 3rd Street. I think that's something I would like to see become a higher priority item for us moving forward.
I think the thing that strikes me in all of this stuff is basically all these plans get made all the time. And I think it's just, important for all of us to focus on actually making sure we make a lot of this stuff actually happen, especially when it comes to the TIF. It's been something that's been talked about forever, getting TIF on 3rd Street. And we need to make sure that happens, just like as Tony was talking about with the bus routes. The plans are only as good as us enforcing them, getting it to actually move forward in that action. So we need to make sure we're being as proactive as possible with the things we can be.
Absolutely. And that's one of the great parts of this downtown plan is it does have that action plan component where it should provide to us kind of a roadmap for how to actually move forward and implement some of these ideas.
I like all their ideas, but I think a lot of them, most of them are what we've been talking about anyway. And it's just kind of assuring us that we're on the right track by what they're saying. And as far as the TIF plan on 3rd Street, I think the sooner the better on that before any more development starts happening. Because I just think that's going to be coming up here very soon and you don't want to miss out on that tax capture for that. And I'm in agreement with those meters on 3rd Street as well to get some more revenue.
Great. And the trees, right, Jim?
Yeah, I think it was a great, I think it was a great plan. And my signal's in and out this morning, but I really like the route and connecting and people downtown to the university, to the hospital. I think that's something that's as they identified as well. I think the parking, Becky's got some interesting information to share, so I'll leave it at that. But I don't want to see this plan, just like the rest of you. I don't want to see it just sit on the shelf. So I think we can take some action and move forward. So good work.
Thank you, Jack.
back to me.
Back to you.
Moving along. Okay, great. We're down to the old business part of our agenda, and the first item and the only item on there is the Bluff Street ramp repairs.
Yes, so at our last board meeting, or maybe it was a couple meetings ago, the board directed me to pursue a structural assessment of the Bluff Street ramp. That was based off a recommendation that we had from a construction or a company, Merit Construction, out of Minnesota, indicating that the Bluff Street ramp needed some repairs to both the expansion joint and the top coat on the upper level. So I did have GEI conduct that structural assessment. I haven't gotten the final report back yet. I'm hoping to have that by the end of this week. However, in their preliminary findings and based on their review, as well as the original construction drawings and drawings from the 2011 repairs, we do have a good news, bad news situation with the ramp. So I'll start with the good news, being that it does appear as though the ramp could support a third level. And so I think that would be a very viable solution for us to pursue. I think that would be more feasible for the time being to add that third level than to build a whole new parking structure. But as Nicole pointed out, and as was just stated in the presentation, it does kind of depend on strategically how we want to move forward and how we want to structure any further development in other areas, you know, whether that be the Spring Street lot or the Commons lot as they indicated. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that is definitely a possibility. It would require, you know, if this is something that we want to pursue, it would require a more in-depth evaluation of the structure of the ramp and its load-bearing abilities, which would come with some additional cost. They advised me it would be about $5,000 to have that additional assessment done. And then to put together a set of construction documents, if it was something that we wanted to pursue, they would be able to provide us that service. It would be between $20,000 and $25,000. So just to put that out there now to start, you know, thinking about, is that an option that we want to pursue? But I think, again, that's very good news that it likely would be able to support that third level. So the bad news is, as part of that assessment, they did find an area of concern that needs to be addressed immediately. And that is, it's kind of at the ceiling between the upper and lower levels above, it's on that back wall, so above 2 of the 24-hour reserved spaces. There's, let me see if I can share my screen here. I do have a photo of the damage. Let's see. Okay, can you guys see it there?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the area of concern. They did recommend that we don't have anybody parked there until that area is able to be repaired. So we have moved those 2 parking rental tenants from the lower level, and then also are not having anybody park on that area on the upper level. I have reached out to 3 contracting companies to take a look at it. They said they're not comfortable doing anything and providing us a quote until they're able to see that report from GEI, just so they have a clear assessment of what needs to happen there to do so safely. And so, like I said, I'm expecting that report by the end of the week. Once I have that, I'll share it with those contractors and get some quotes to get that area repaired.
Becky, I have a question.
Sure.
So we were having them look at just, you know, we had the engineering done just because of the quote we had originally gotten. Did they have any comments or anything based off of that quote we had gotten for the expansion joint and everything else?
Well, again, I haven't seen the final report, but just from my conversations with them, they did agree that that top coat would need to be repaired. They did offer up the possibility of patching it for the time being, if that's something that we chose to do. I wondered about doing that, just if that might give us a little bit more time to make that assessment about, do we want to add that third level to the ramp? And would it be prudent for us to recoat that, what is now the top level, if it's not going to be the top level for that much longer? Would patching it give us enough time to kind of defer that until we add that third level, was one thought that I had. They did seem to think that that would be an option. Of course, there is that element of risk in doing that, and it's not going to be as, I don't want to say as thorough, or obviously just a patch job is not going to be as thorough as if we were to do the complete recoating. Mm-hmm. The expansion joint will have to be replaced. We could have a little bit of time for that as well from their initial conversations. But again, I think we'll have a better idea once we're able to see that report. And hopefully, I mean, we'll be meeting here again in a couple of weeks, since this July meeting was postponed until today. So we will be meeting again shortly. And at that point, we can hopefully expand this conversation once we have that report in hand. So I guess that's all I had as far as the report on the ramp. I did just want to make you aware that I am pursuing those quotes and that we will have the cost of those repairs, which at this point it's hard to estimate what that will be, but it's something that needs to be done.
Rebecca, when will the final report from GEI come in?
Today or tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Good. I think that's probably something we'll have to do is wait and see what that says. Our contractors that'll be bidding on it need that as well. And I think we'll have to look at the repairs. If we did go with a third level, which we're not deciding today, and it's just some discussion that started today, I still think we need to do the repairs on that top coat, because our third level, if we decide to go that road, could be years and years down the road. We don't know that.
Right, that's true.
I think it'd be prudent to look at the repair, that top coat and that expansion joint. But I think we have to see what our damage is on the photograph that you showed us first. Just my opinion. Are we ready to move on? Is there any other questions for Rebecca on the Bluff Street ramp repairs? All right, we can move on to new business, which is number one item is the draft budget for fiscal year 2021.
Okay. I did send out the draft budget. I apologize for getting it to you rather late. I was working on getting it together and Jack was kind enough to work with me on it. And so I'm going to share my screen again and I'll bring it up. Whoops. Okay, can you guys see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have the draft budget. 2021 fiscal year budget does reflect a total revenue of $1,370,943 and expenditures of $1,612,543. It does reflect then a deficit of $241,600, and that's due to the expenses for the 100 block of West Washington Street reconstruction project that is on the city's capital improvement plan for construction in the summer of 2021. The DDA's portion of the project, as estimated by the city engineering department, is anticipated to be $243,000. I would like to open up some conversation with the city to evaluate that based on our contract with the city and what construction costs they're responsible for and what we're responsible for. Typically, the city's responsible for ordinary construction costs, and we, as the DDA, typically pay for the enhancements. So that would be if we do the stamped concrete or the trees and the tree guards and grates or the electricity, that type of thing, you know, the more enhancement type activities. So just to put that out there, that I would like to have additional conversations with them about that. The total project cost, they estimated about $500,000. So I would question if our portion is really nearly half of that, or if we can't negotiate that down somewhat, because I would imagine the ordinary construction costs would be significantly higher than just the enhancements. So just to put that out there. In doing the budget, I did make some assumptions that I wanted to share with you. Ordinary revenue is anticipated to be up in 2021 from the estimated 2020 figures due to the loss of COVID-19. So it did make it somewhat difficult to use this year's figures to estimate next year, not knowing what COVID-19 will bring. Hopefully, you know, with the next fiscal year, we will have overcome this hurdle. Again, it's hard to say. So just keep that in mind with these numbers, that we're working with some very uncertain times. Grant revenues will decrease because we will be completing our facade improvement grant and also our match on main grant programs. Parking revenues, again, those are very difficult to estimate at this point in time. I do see them rebounding from the 2020 loss, probably not to previous levels, but based on my preliminary observations at this point in time, after our 3-month shutdown, parking rental revenues are about on par with where they would normally be, having, well, let me rephrase that. We would have the loss from the previous quarter, but having invoiced for this coming quarter, those revenues are back to the quarterly revenues that we would anticipate seeing. The meter revenues are not 100% back yet, but the report that I was looking at was for June and July, and we didn't start the meters back up until the middle of June. So it is down a little bit, but I anticipate that going up even with the tourism this summer, that we'll start to see some of those costs recouped. Mm-hmm. Interest rates anticipated will be low in the aftermath of COVID-19. The farmers market flow through funds, that would be the revenue that we take in for the market money and for the supplemental food assistance programs through the market. However, if you guys recall, we're not offering the market money anymore, the option for customers to use their credit card at the information kiosk, and rather the vendors will be responsible for their own credit cards. And so the market money was the bulk of our flow through funds. So I anticipate the flow through revenues and expenditures to go down significantly without those market money reimbursements. Professional service expenditures will decrease because we'll be completing our downtown plan. DDA is responsible for $50,000 worth of that plan, which we have been paying regularly as we've gone through the process. And the MEDC had awarded us a technical assistance grant in the amount of $30,000 for that as well. But with that plan coming to an end here, as we just heard, by this fall, we won't have those expenditures for next year. I did assume a wage increase across the board of 3% for cost of living for staff, health insurance increase of 5%, which is what we've been experiencing typically for the last several years. And then capital outlay will increase over 100% from the 2020 budget because we didn't replace any of the parking meters this year as anticipated due to the COVID-19. The Bluff Street ramp repairs are being deferred to 2021, anticipating that by the time we get the structural assessment back and go out to bid and get that project going, will likely be into the next fiscal year. And then of course the 100 block of West Washington Street streetscape project, which again, right now is estimated at that $243,000 mark. 2021 capital outlay notes. I'm anticipating roughly $15,000. That would be for light poles. We put the banners up on 3rd Street last year. I would anticipate doing so for the core downtown in this coming fiscal year. Also, we're working on entryway signage updates. Right now, working on that 3rd Street Fair Avenue signage. We also anticipate doing the 2 other entryways of downtown being 7th Street and South Front Street. Furnishings and street amenities of $5,000, just being benches, trash cans, picnic tables, that type of thing. Equipment of $56,000. As Tom mentioned in our presentation, the trend is to transition to pay stations, and that's something that we've talked about before, and definitely a direction that I would look to go to as we replace the meters and hopefully replacing them with pay stations. They're roughly $12,000 a piece. Looking at 4 for next year, what I would like to do ultimately, with the board's agreement, is as we redo that 100 block of Washington Street, we'll have to remove the meters, obviously, for the construction project. At that point, I would look to replace the meters with the pay stations and it would appear as though we'd have to do 2 on each side of the street, or 2 on the north side, 2 on the south side. Bluff Street ramp repairs, I have estimated 185,000, and that would be for that expansion joint replacement and the recoding that we just talked about. Site and land improvements, 268,000, 243 of which would be that 100 block of Washington Street. We are working on a tree replacement plan with the city arborist. We replaced 12 trees this fiscal year. I've been advised that we have about 20 more that will have to be removed because they are infected with the ash borer. And so I've anticipated $7,300 to get those trees replaced downtown, and landscaping of $17,700. We've talked over the last year or two about hiring out landscaping for some of the key green space areas downtown. So I would estimate those funds going to that project as well. And then building improvements of $5,000 for commons facility painting and repairs. Another thing that Jack and I talked about the other day, with interest rates being such as they are, is the possibility of refinancing our 2011 bond. That would depend on if it's callable or able to be paid off prior to the 15 years. Right now, we're looking to pay through 2026. Current interest rate is 4.35%. Right now, we have outstanding debt of $865,000. We have not made that bond payment yet for this year. After we do, we'll be looking at $750,000 remaining. Any questions on that so far?
Nope.
Just so you know, the municipal market right now is, with the rates being down, I've seen below 1% for 10 years. So, I mean, the U.S. Treasury is right around 0.6 right now. So for 10 years. So that might be a way for us to save some money and possibly do some additional. And now might be a good time to borrow more money for the TIF as well.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, and moving on. I'll just go through this briefly. Our authorized positions here, I anticipate remaining the same. We've got executive director, promotions and events coordinator, farmers market manager, operations administrator, maintenance coordinator, and 2 full-time maintenance staff. We also have an office assistant, 3 part-time maintenance staff, and then our farmers market cashiers, who are part-time seasonal workers. Program statistics, just to show you where we are right now, our taxable value is $51,248,945, and you'll see there broken down between downtown and 3rd Street. We have 357 properties throughout our district, 77 on North 3rd Street and 280 in our original DDA district. And then again, with the bond issue there, which we just talked about. Here we just have our ongoing functions. I'm sure you guys are aware, but just to go over again, that we do facilitate private property investment with grant funding opportunities, public improvement projects as well. We have our management and maintenance of public spaces, including the commons, sidewalk, pedestrian walkways, connectors, elevator towers. We do take care of the flags, flowers, decorations, lights, trash removal, parking management and maintenance, events and promotions. This year, our events are not as plentiful as in years past and years to come, of course, because of COVID-19. But we do look to reinstate those events for next year, fingers crossed. 2019, 2020 accomplishments and projects, many of these are ongoing right now. Of course, we did have our executive director leadership transition last year at the beginning of the start of the fiscal year, working on our downtown master plan, still moving forward with our facade improvement grant program, which we'll talk more about shortly. We've also secured $50,000 in Match on Main COVID-19 response program grant funds to assist our businesses with recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. We are still working on our Passport mobile pay application and the digital permitting, moving forward with that as we speak. Continuing our brand identity implementation, again, looking to make those signage improvements and not only the entryway signage, but eventually replacing the blue identity signage, I guess for lack of a better word, that we have at the entrances of our green spaces and our parking lots. And I believe we have maybe 50 of them throughout downtown. Again, installation of the banners on 3rd Street and downtown. This past year, we've donated over $17,000 in event proceeds to the Women's Center through Ladies Night and also the 3rd Street Car Show. We've raised $12,500 in event sponsorships, and of course have the Wednesday evening and Saturday morning farmers market. For 2021, we look to do that 100 block of Washington Street reconstruction project, continue to analyze and implement our parking management strategy, plan for future development of parking as we just talked about, continue our facade grants, that tree replacement plan, signage replacement plan, and funding opportunities for 3rd Street. This is the fee structure for what we currently are charging, what I would anticipate changing for this coming year. Many of them would stay the same. I am looking at re-evaluating our parking permit fee structure. Right now, a daily permit is $25 per month. The Bluff Street Ramp Reserved is $60 a month, and then our 24-hour residential, so those are in our parking lots, $45 a month. Those rates have not increased since 2013. So I think given that we are looking at expanding our parking facilities, I think that's something that we should implement, especially with our transition to our digital permitting coming up. I think that would be a good time to just kind of take a look at our overall parking strategy and make some of those changes. Commons rental. I apologize, I didn't mix up the nonprofit and the private there, but the way it currently stands, we have a $75 per hour private rental rate, and that would be for any group outside of a nonprofit that would rent the facility for meetings, parties, whatever the case may be, with a separate nonprofit rate of $35 per hour. I would like to suggest just eliminating that nonprofit rate and just going with a straight $75 per hour fee. I think that's still very reasonable and very much in line or slightly less than other facilities, city owned and otherwise, as far as event venues. The rest I would anticipate staying the same. So did you guys have any questions on the fees?
I agree with getting rid of the nonprofit fee for the commons. I think just having one straight fee is a good idea. And I think it's actually pretty on par, if not even a little bit cheaper than other places too, for the same kind of what you're providing. And then I had a question too for the parking. I noticed that the pay station in the north main lot has been broken for over like a month now. So I know that's kind of cutting into our revenue. Is there any anticipation of that getting fixed, or do you guys know what's wrong with it?
I would have to look into the status, but we are working on it.
Okay.
The pay stations and the meters are both getting up there in age, and so it's getting more difficult to maintain them.
Yeah, I just noticed with more businesses opening too downtown that lot is starting to be fuller, longer. So it's a good opportunity. I mean, obviously, about all that. Yeah. And then also I noticed that the Masonic I know we had talked about this a few months ago, that they had sold themselves to their new name, which is a nonprofit, and how does that affect us and looking at 2021 taxes and stuff like that?
That transition, I believe, is still happening. It hasn't been finalized yet.
Okay.
I believe it's anticipated for the end of the year. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's my understanding, and I don't know if anybody has any additional information, but it's my understanding that as they transition to a nonprofit, that because they're renting to for-profit entities, that only a portion of the property would be nonprofit or wouldn't pay the property taxes, where the rest of it would. But again, if anybody else knows differently, please feel free to jump into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It seems like they're keeping it pretty hush hush, but I know it was a concern that we had when we first kind of heard about that transition. So I didn't know if that was an anticipated change for next year.
Yeah. Well, and I'll move down here to this part since it's a good segue. I did receive our TIF and 2 mil tax revenue estimates from the city. You know what they say about certainties of life being death and taxes. So the good news for us is we really shouldn't see too much of an impact on our TIF revenues and the 2 mil because of COVID-19. I did follow up with Gary Simpson at the city just to confirm, you know, are these figures anticipated to remain the same? Did he foresee any factors at play that might affect those revenues? And he said really, the only thing in his mind would be if something came down from the state level, deferring property tax payments, you know, in response to COVID-19, or, you know, to provide property owners with that relief. But he hasn't heard anything like that coming down the pipeline. So he said to move forward with those revenue expectations as they are.
Becky, I have a question about the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, as we look at the budget for the other ordinary revenue, going from 17 to 20, that cost goes up, and then in 2021 your projected goes down to 108,000. What's the reason for that?
Well, the other ordinary revenues would be, let me see what I had in my notes here. That would be things like the commons rental. It would be farmers market. It would be our promotions. The farmers market revenue, again, like I mentioned, those numbers are going to go down because we aren't having those flow through funds.
Sure.
And that the market money flow through is roughly about $50,000 a year. But again, those would be going right back out as expenditures. So they cancel each other out, but that's why the revenue would show up less.
Okay.
Okay, so just to touch upon this briefly, so here are total revenues for 2021 would again be that 1.3 million, expenditures at the 1.6, with our revenue over expenditures of $777,637. And you'll see here is just the chart depicting our 2017 through budget year 2021 revenues versus expenditures. For 2021, obviously showing that deficit here again because of that 100 block of Washington Street project. Moving forward, I'll just point out a few things on here. If you guys have questions along the way, please feel free to just interrupt me and ask them. Interest earnings here, as we talked about earlier, with the interest rates being anticipated lower in response to COVID-19. That's why our interest earnings revenues look to go down. Again, the TIF and 2 mil tax revenues provided by the city. Parking rental revenues, I had at $160,000. That would be down a little bit from the 165 from this year's budget. Again, you'll see here, this 116 is reflective of the fact that we didn't do that invoicing of the second quarter because of COVID-19. So again, difficult to estimate based on this year's number what next year will look like.
Is
I
the,
do anticipate the rental permit revenue at least coming nearly back to normal.
and that's with the increase in fees?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see. The other thing to note too is that with the shift to the digital permits, we may or may not see a change in our number of permits, maybe initially as we make that transition. Again, it could go up as people realize that it's a much more convenient option for them to be able to just go online and purchase that permit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the world of parking.
Yeah, with a $5 increase per month for the permit, I don't feel like you're going to lose people buying permits. Because it's still a better rate for those who work full time than paying the meter, you know?
Right. Well, and really, if you think about it, for a daily permit to go up from $25 to $30 a month, it's just $1 a day.
Yeah.
If you look at it that way. One other thing I wanted to notice here, promotions and sponsorships. Estimated 20, where are we here? Sorry, this is so small. Estimated 2020, you'll see, is significantly lower than what we anticipated. That, of course, being because we had to cancel so many of our events. Again, hoping that by next year we're able to reinstate those. So I have estimated promotion revenue of 31,000. Jumping down to farmers market fees, again, we took a pretty significant hit here with the 17,253 because we haven't been able to have our regular market as we have traditionally in the past. We did have the online market, and what we did there, instead of charging a flat rate for participating, was charging back 3% of vendor sales. Which in the end, I would say that we made about $3,000 to $4,000 on the online market. So not a significant amount, but we certainly didn't lose money on it either. And we're able to offer that opportunity to our vendors and to customers to have that access to local food during the shutdown. And the difference being right now too is typically at this point in time with the physical market, we would have had this large influx of revenue coming in from our vendor registration fees, which would have mostly been paid at this point in time. Because of our transition, we haven't had that. And instead, because we're bringing back vendors slowly, as circumstances allow, we're charging them what would essentially be the vendor registration season fee divided out by week. So it ends up being about $20 per week. And then they're paying basically as they go $20 a week to be there. So we will see those revenues coming in, but it'll be on a more frequent basis rather than having that large chunk of revenue that we normally would have had at this point already. Here's where you'll see the farmers market flow through going down from the low 60s. The 16,000 is estimated based on what we pay right now for bridge card reimbursements and the Market Fresh and Project Fresh, which is the senior and WIC programs. Any questions on the revenues anticipated? Are you guys doing okay? Do you want me to speed it up, skip over things, keep going as we are?
I mean, I've reviewed it all, so you can feel free to speed it up for me.
Okay. I know we have more to talk about, so.
Yeah, I prefer to speed it up a little bit. And if there's people, when do we have to adopt this meeting?
Yes, it has to be to the city for August 1st.
Okay, so we don't.
I would like to adopt it this year, or this meeting.
All right. Well, we had a chance to review it, so I would say pick it up a little bit, but I don't want to leave anybody behind.
Okay. I guess I'll just point out a couple things here with the revenues. Again, as I mentioned earlier, salaries and wages, I just anticipated 3% across the board for wage increases. Again, here you'll see the expenditures with the market flow through going significantly down. Again, here the professional contractual would be down because we're not paying that $50,000 anymore for our downtown plan. And then the capital expenditures that we talked about earlier, here's where they're reflected. We talked about those figures earlier. So unless you guys have any questions about those, I'll just move on. Any questions? Nope. Okay. This is really the meat of the budget here. Again, you see this 241,600 deficit at the end of the year, which would leave our revenue over expenditures at 777,537, which is typically lower than what we've had for the past several years. So to dip into that 100 block project would require dipping into our fund balance. But again, I feel like that's something that has been talked about and has even been on the schedule for the past couple of years and wasn't able to happen last year. And having gotten it on the city capital improvement plan, I would definitely like to see that move forward so that we can make that 100 block more secure and safe for pedestrians.
And I do think we're all hopeful that that number goes down. And full agreement with you that number just doesn't seem right to me.
I know. I am going to pursue that further. Trust me. I agree 100%, and I'm working on that. This here shows our total budget that we just went over, broken down by fund. I'm sure you've all had a chance to look at the budget detail. We've got the parking fund on these 2 pages, and then promotions budget, and then the farmers market budget, which based on my estimates, we should be looking at $5,000 deficit for next year, which considering where we've been and how far we've come with the market, I think is tremendous. Keeping in mind that $13,000 that the DDA board has agreed to supplement the market, that does give us a little bit of leeway there. Okay, that's it. Here's our bond, just showing as we pay off our bond where we'll be in 2026, unless of course we look into that refinancing, and then our estimated fund balance projections for the next 5 years. Any questions?
I guess I would just state that obviously, I mean, Rebecca stated a couple of times, but we're dipping into that fund balance quite a bit there. I think it's a project that we need to do, and echo Jeremy's comments. We all hope that it's going to come in less than that, but I mean, that's kind of the big difference for this year compared to other previous years. I know in the past there was some instruction or some desire by the former executive director to keep that number up towards $1 million at the 777 marker. We expect that we will still have enough in cash basically to, if we needed to pay off our bond, then we could do that. So
thank you, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Back to me.
Back to you.
So I have just one quick question for me, and it's something I wanted to bring up about the parking fees for the people that are working downtown that pay the rentals. it seems like we're going to boost their fee, but we're not going to boost the tourist fee. And I think there's more revenue, is there not, in the parking meter? Is there a way to boost that up? And are we just going to get too much pushback from the community if we bump that up to, say, instead of 50 cents an hour to 75 cents an hour? We're raising the people that we know and not, or yeah, we're raising the people that we know and not raising the people we don't know. So.
Right, that's a good point, Tony. What I would say about that is, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't raised those parking rental rates since 2013. So I think that's long overdue. We could look at changing our meter rates. We did up those more recently. When we put the meters in, it went up from 25 cents an hour to 50 cents an hour. So that was roughly 3 years ago. I am quite interested in Tom Brown's recommendation. He and I have spoken, and he mentioned it earlier today, about possibly adjusting the meter rates depending on location. So for the outlying areas, keeping that at 50, but looking to increase maybe the 100 block of Washington or Front, or the more highly utilized areas, bumping those rates up, which we do have the ability to do through our back end system with the meters. So I think moving forward that we can start to kind of tweak that a little bit to help kind of even out the parking and force those people who want to park right on Washington Street to pay a little bit more than those who are willing to park maybe, further away and walk a further distance.
And I'm one of the ones that uses the 24-hour reserved, and $5 a month certainly isn't going to make a difference to us, but I would be concerned that our downtown workers, it'd be easier for them to dump quarters in a meter, or cheaper in a sense, than to buy a permit. So I want to make sure that we're cognizant of that. And I think there's an opportunity there to evaluate that a little bit. But I'm not opposed to what you proposed here. I just want to make sure I'm thinking about those workers that are downtown.
Yeah. I had the same thought too, because I still feel like 50 cents an hour for meter parking is extremely cheap, especially for the destinations like Washington Street, where it's more desirable, or where everything is. And maybe we look at increasing that change when we put those meters in on Third, or when we get those new pay stations. That might be a good timeline for that. But I did have the same thought as you, Tony. Would there be so much blowback from the community? Because it seems like when that rate increase to 50 cents happened, there was a lot of conjecture about it. And, that's fine. I feel like the smaller group has the biggest voice when it's in opposition, and I feel like now everyone's gotten used to it, and looking at the potential revenue, it outweighs the blowback for me. But something to definitely think about for the near future.
We're raising the rates of some pretty steady customers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you say there'd be recommendations in the plan that we're getting on the meter pricing?
Yes.
I think what you're talking about makes sense too, is the more premium, the closer to the action, that prices could differ from the outlying ones. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
I think those prices are a lot easier to control too, with having on-site parking as opposed to meter parking. When we have those stations, we can certainly mix and match the pricing. I feel like a lot easier.
All right, we can move on to facade grant recommendations.
Do we need to approve the budget?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I make a motion to approve the budget.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jack and Jeremy. There's a motion and support on the floor to approve the proposed budget. Is there any further discussion? All in favor by aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you. Now we can move on to facade grant recommendations.
Okay. Okay, so just to provide some brief background, after our initial round of grants from 2019, 2020, we had 9 completed facade grant projects. We did go back, having had a little bit of funding left. We went back to the original round of applications and ended up awarding a grant to Michelle Butler with the Tie House, which she has started that project. I don't know if you've seen it up on 3rd Street, but that one's underway at this time. After the rest of the grants were completed, we ended up with $30,000 roughly, just over, left because we had 2 projects from that initial round that weren't able to happen for various reasons. And then a couple of the other projects came in under budget. So we had this pot of money, which was significantly less, of course, than our original 330, but still significant. And we wanted to be able to help additional property owners make improvements to their facades. So we did open up to another round of applications. It was just a brief application period, but we received 13 applications, which I was very pleasantly surprised by. It was a collection of very good projects, in our opinion. Some more comprehensive and holistic than others. But we went through the same process as last time with our review committee, which was Jeremy, Tara here from the office, myself, and Dennis Stakowitz from the city. We used the scoring matrix program that we did before, based that, because the framework for our conversations, but that wasn't the only deciding factor. I mean, we also looked at each application, each project proposal very closely and evaluated how it best fits with the project and what we're hoping to accomplish with this program. And so with all of that said, we narrowed it down to 2 property owners that we're recommending for approval. One is Black Rocks up on 3rd Street. They had requested $30,000, which was the maximum grant request for a project that's anticipated to be a $60,000 project. They have purchased the property next to their existing building and are looking to kind of merge the 2 and connect them and do a rooftop kind of area, for lack of a better description. New facade, new entryway, masonry brick on the building, signage. They're looking to do some metal roof repair replacement that is not eligible. Roofs were not eligible activities according to our grant guidelines. But the first recommendation is to fund $10,000 worth of their project, of course, excluding the roof activity. The other one being the Quinnell Law Firm, which is 419 419 West Washington Street, across from the Ramada.
Next to the Coach Light.
Yeah, next to Coach Light. They're looking to do a very comprehensive project that would include all 4 sides of their property, because all 4 are visible, obviously from Washington Street, but also from the bike path. And they're looking to do masonry on a portion of it, as well as new contemporary siding, the rear alley of the building as well. They're restoring the handicapped area, which right now the ramp is it's dangerous, and so they'll be reconfiguring that. That project is estimated at $190,000, so significant total project cost. And they asked for $30,000, and we are recommending the remaining $20,524.51 go toward that project. I did provide in the agenda packets kind of the breakdown of what the matrix scoring ended up looking like. We did have five projects that stood out to all of us as being the closest to what we're looking to accomplish. 2 of them, the South Park of Marquette and the Buffalo Dragon Investments, which is the former Book World, which will be the Honorable Distillery, scored very high. They're very impressive projects. The difference being between those 2 and the 2 that we're recommending is that we were looking at the security of our investment, or at this point in time, we have a limited time frame to work within our grant term, and able to award these grants allow the recipients time to conduct their project and then get all of the reimbursements and close out the grant. We have a limited time frame to do that. Also, we were looking at less risky projects, I guess is how I would say it. Those that we know are happening for sure and are happening within that realistic time frame, and that are with property owners who've been long-term property owners with established businesses and looking to support them as they commit to making this investment to their property into downtown. Whereas the other two projects, they're not quite as certain. There's one, the Valleys, former Valleys, which is the South Park of Marquette, is currently right now in ownership transition, being purchased from the bank. And so while it's a great project, there is that element of uncertainty. And then as well as the Buffalo Dragon project, that one I know that they're pursuing funding to move their project forward through the MEDC. Again, there's some concern as far as the timeline of that and if it would fit within the timeline that we have to work with our facade grant program, and not wanting to perhaps invest in projects that aren't going to happen because of whatever unforeseen circumstances or timeframes they have to work with, and then having that fund of money again to say, okay, now what do we do with it? Do we go back out? Do we, we want to get this project done and we want to spend this money prudently and be able to close out this grant. So with that said, that's why we chose the two established properties as opposed to the two that are up and coming, if you will. The other one, Queen City Running, that scored rather highly. They actually started their project already. So they've done some of their painting and they've done their signage. And according to the grant guidelines, any project that was started prior to grant award would not be eligible. So
Becky, can you, I guess, are we open to questions?
Sure.
Can you remind me of the time frame? Isn't it next year sometime that the fund?
Yes. We have to have everything done and submitted by September of next year. So given the time frame right now that we're midway through construction season, we want people to be able to secure their contractors and get the work done. If they can't do it now, depending on the scope of their project, they would have some time next summer as well.
So I guess, with that, to me, we got over a year to do it. So, I don't know. I heard that's one of the main reasons why you decided to award the projects that you did.
Let me piggyback off of kind of what Becky was saying, just based off of some of our discussions too. So one of the things we looked at from kind of the beginning with this grant were projects that were new construction versus projects that were businesses that were already developed. So I don't know that it's necessarily in the spirit of this grant to be awarding, grant funds to brand new businesses that are just starting up. Basically, one of the guidelines in the grant is talking about businesses expanding and businesses that are of, buildings that are of historical significance, things like that. So when we started discussing as a group, just kind of where we wanted to go with the remaining funds, it was kind of, especially with the Quinnell Law Firm, that building, out of all of the projects we've looked at, in my opinion, it has the most probably impact to the downtown area because it's in more of a blighted block that really could use that just facelift. And that project stood out to me more than any of them, like I said, that we have reviewed at this point. And then when it comes to the Black Rocks project, that project basically, from looking at it from Washington to 3rd Street, it was just kind of put together well, and you can fully respect where they're coming from and know that it's going to get done. But adding to that, we don't have the knowledge of knowing that, these businesses that we haven't approved grants for are actually even going to be developed at this point. the business on 3rd Street hasn't closed at this point. So awarding a grant to them doesn't make sense. Same thing with the business on Washington. As far as the distillery goes, there's been absolutely nothing that's really taken place at this point regarding that business. And especially with the threats of COVID and everything else, it just makes a lot more sense to go in a different direction.
Other comments? I have a couple of questions as well.
I have one question too. With BlackRock starting their project already, does that not fall into the same category as what Queen City Running has already done?
Have they started already?
Well, they've taken out some trees in the property that they bought adjacent to them, and then they've redone a whole backyard patio area already. I don't think they've actually started on the building itself. I mean, I totally support your guys' decisions already. I think both those places are the right choices, but I would just wanted to make sure that it was clear and fair, you know?
Oh, yeah, I would see those activities as being outside of the grant.
Okay.
Because it's not the actual facade, the exterior.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Well, I too support the decisions of the committee, but I do have some questions. Would they not be just disqualified from consideration if they weren't closed, or if the business wasn't secure and fully theirs yet? And then back to Queen City Running, if they've already started the project, wouldn't you just eliminate them? I look at the scoring matrix and we're awarding to the 5th best in a sense. And again, I don't disagree with that. I really agree with the fact that it is a little bit of a blighted block, and it's great to see that, but they're number 5 in the lineup if they, and then you have somebody that's number 1 in the scoring matrix, but didn't get awarded. So wouldn't they just be disqualified and not even be considered for award if they weren't one turned over or not closed on the property, and then the other they've started construction? It would be easier to explain that to folks in the public that this is not a public document. So folks in the public that see this, and some of the ones that won't be awarded that maybe had a really high thoughts of being awarded, or really thought they were going to get awarded because they had a great project, and they're eliminated somehow. Did you guys give any consideration to that? Just not even looking at their grant application.
Well, as Jeremy mentioned earlier, and this is, I guess, one of the issues is with the scoring matrix. One category is assessing, okay, does this business owner participate in downtown events? Does this property stay well maintained, you know, around the perimeter, free of debris and garbage and that type of thing? And does this business or property owner actively promote themselves and their business to the downtown and the community? And it's very difficult with judging those things for businesses that haven't existed yet. And so I guess I can't speak for the others and how they did their scoring, but for me, and maybe this isn't the right way to do it, I thought, okay, well, I'm just, because I'm scoring and I have to score these components, I'm just going to estimate that yes, they will, and you know, score them as a 2, which elevates their ultimate score. But I don't know that to be the case, because again, we don't know, because they aren't established businesses yet. So that's how I did it. I guess, I don't know, Jeremy, how you looked at it, but I didn't feel right not scoring them at all on those things.
Sure. Yeah, and I scored those businesses as 0s for that category, whereas you know, Dennis and Tara might have scored them higher, or may have even just given blank scores to all of them. The one thing, you know, that was brought up during our last discussions of approval that I'll bring up again to the rest of the board, the numbers that are associated with the scoring system, that is just a guideline for us to start our basis of conversation on. And it has nothing to do with, there's nothing that says we have to award the grant to the highest scoring, you know, participant, because frankly, the scoring is all subjective. And, you know, honestly, the score that matters the most, in my opinion, is Becky's, because a lot of the questions are actually about the business itself and what they're conducting and how clean they are keeping the area in front of their business, as she's already pointed out to. So the questions themselves are subjective, I understand that it's a public document, but I think the most important thing to stress once again is that this is just a baseline for conversations. So the top business that's there may not actually be the top business from a scoring standpoint when it's all said and done.
Thank you. That helps, Jeremy. And again, we support the committee's decisions. We just need some verification of, the thought process of what went into it. You saw a pretty large investment starting out right away from the Honorable Distillery with their demolition, and they just haven't been around. And I don't know if it's due to COVID or funding or whatever. So it's very, very difficult. You guys had a tough job. And again, I support it. I appreciate your clarification on a few things as well. Any further discussion or questions? Nothing. I guess with that then, Rebecca, we're ready for a motion to award or accept the committee's recommendations. Is that correct? We have to, I assume, do a motion on this?
Yes, that's correct.
So at this point, we'd be looking for a motion to approve the committee's recommendations for BlackRock's Real Estate and Quinnell Law Firm for the grant awards and the amount shown that we have on our score sheet and the other information that was provided. Is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Support.
Sounds like there's a motion and support. Is there any further discussion?
Was that Jack supporting?
I think so.
Yeah.
Or it could be Robert. Sorry, Nicole.
I know. We share the same
Robert.
computer.
No problem.
So there's a motion and support on the floor, so to speak, to approve the committee's recommendations. There was any further discussion other than I want to thank the committee for their work. I know that's extra time involved, and you guys
Yes.
really explain it well as far as the justification for the scoring, yet the awards are a little bit different, and I fully support that. I just wanted to be prepared, as my questions alluded to. I want to be prepared if people from the downtown district approach any one of us as board members. We have support and in our decision making. So with that, I'll ask for not a motion, but a all in favor by aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. The motion passes unanimously. And again, thank you, committee.
Excuse me.
Rebecca?
Okay, moving on. I don't have much for committee reports. None of our committees have met since our last meeting, so I will just bypass that part of the agenda and move on to my director's report. Segueing into this from our facade grants to our facade grants, we did have plaque presentations conducted recently on July 16th to 5 of our projects that were completed over the fall and the first few months of the year. Then COVID hit and we weren't able to do our plaque presentations, and so it's delayed, but we were finally able to do so with again the 5 projects of Symbiose up on 3rd Street, Be Kind, Be Well, which is 610 former McDonald's Music, Breakers Roadhouse, Superior Hearing Aid, and the Preserve. I'm very pleased with the representation that we had from city commissioners. We had Commissioners Stonehouse, Davis, Frazier, and Schlegel in attendance, and also some state and federal representatives. Representative Ken Benzie was there, and then Jake Pudala on behalf of Ed McBroom, and Rich Rothway on behalf of Jack Bergman, and then myself and Jen Tucker from the MEDC. So we had a nice representation. We all wore our masks. It was nicely scheduled by Tara here in the office. We went from place to place to place to place to place over the course of a 2-hour time span. So very pleased with that. I think noticeably absent were DDA board representatives. So I would encourage you guys to participate in things like this moving forward. I think it's important, especially as we show our appreciation and recognition to property owners who have chosen to invest in downtown, and also, showing our thanks to the MEDC for their ongoing financial support. So again, I mean, I don't mean to give a slap on the wrist, but just encourage you guys to consider when things like this come up, that you do show up to represent the DDA. moving on, the Match on Main grant that we recently received. I just yesterday received the grant agreement from the MEDC, which I will return to them today, at which point then we'll be able to move forward with getting that funding from the MEDC and then distribute it to the 15 businesses that we awarded those grants to as soon as possible once we've secured those funds in our account. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was I'd spoken with Jen Tucker from the MEDC a while ago, wondering if it would be possible for her to present to our board on our relationship with the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and also the Land Development Financing Authority, Smart Zone, and how we might work together or have a good understanding of how each of us relates to each other when it comes to projects downtown, what our responsibilities are, what opportunities there might be to work with each other, the potential impacts of foregoing our DDA TIF funds for brownfield projects. I mean, I personally would like to learn more about that. And I would open it up to you guys if you think that that's something beneficial worth pursuing. She said that she would be definitely interested in providing an educational opportunity for us and even bringing in the folks from the Brownfield and the Smart Zone to have kind of a joint work session with our DDA board. Is that something that you guys would be interested in?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Better education is warranted here. I'm not as familiar as I'd like to be with the Brownfield. Thanks.
Okay. I'll look at scheduling something with Jen, maybe for August, if that would work for you guys.
Would it be separate from a board meeting or attached to a board meeting, or what do you envision?
I think we would have to do a separate work session and just
Okay.
focus on that and not incorporate it into a board meeting.
Okay, I agree. I think that sounds good.
Okay.
You just send out a poll or something. Okay.
Sure.
For more for the director's report? Okay, thank you. And Mr. Whitney, do you see any public for public comment?
There is no one except the board.
Thank you. We'll move on to board member comment. And what I'll have is I'll start from my list that I see here. And the first one there is Jeremy.
No comment.
Okay, now that list just changed. Robert Rust.
Hi.
Cool.
Becky and Jack, thanks for all your work on the budget. I know sometimes my head spins when I see a lot of numbers like that too, but it's nice to see it all laid out. I do look forward to 2021 as a better year than this year has been. And thanks for wrapping up all of the grant renovation stuff as well. So looking forward to that and hopefully enjoying what's left of summer. So good to see you all again.
All right, thank you, Jim Johnson.
I'd like to thank Rebecca and everybody at the DDA also through all this. I think they've done a great job, and I think all of us really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sean Geary.
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. Thank you guys for everything that you've worked through over the past few months. And obviously today going through the budget, interesting for me being the new guy in the group to get to see that a little bit more in depth. So appreciate that. And then also great job, Jeremy and Becky explaining the fake gate improvements. That clarifications were very helpful. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack Frost.
Trying to get off mute there. So yeah, Rebecca spent a lot of time putting the budget together and learned that we need to figure out a different way to do that because it's all in different spreadsheets that don't connect, and it's kind of a nightmare, but good job putting that together. And I think it'll be nice to see Washington Street redone. I hope us putting that number in the budget, I guess when I reflect on that, the city doesn't look at that and say, oh, they already budgeted for it. So it's theirs to pay. I'm hoping that you can negotiate that away. And I guess we could talk about that, the sidewalks and things like that in the future as that comes to fruition. But good work putting that together, and thanks for the explanation on the grant decisions as well. That was very helpful. And keep up the good work.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks. Did I miss anybody? I have a couple of comments, but I want to make sure I didn't miss a board member because the list kept jumping around on me. So one of the things I wanted to mention, Rebecca, is early on in our meeting today, you mentioned the 2019 and 2020 accomplishments and projects, and a couple of things that you couldn't or probably didn't put in there is what you have done with COVID management and some of the challenges that you face personally and professionally with this COVID, and then also what you've done with your team and the other folks that work at the DDA. You know, I look back in 2019, and there was an early snowfall that you really caught a lot of heck for, and you handled it well. I think that people really appreciate our downtown businesses, really appreciate your leadership, and it's been told to me on a number of occasions. So we appreciate that as well. The other things I wanted to mention was that I think we really have to look into the ramp repair. I agree with what Jeremy said earlier, and I think others said it as well. This isn't this Smith Group and their presentations to us. This isn't a document that we should pull off the shelf 20 years from now, blow the dust off of, and then revisit it by having another study. So I think there's things in there that we can take action on, and I think we really need to do that. We can't kick the can down the road to the next board for some of these repairs that need to take place. I'm supportive of strongly looking at the ramp repair so that we're not making it deteriorate more and costing us more money in the long run. I do share a couple of concerns about the parking stations downtown, just for our older community. I think a great education and helping them with the parking stations downtown. I know Mike Lorla was part of our parking committee, had some concerns about having stations on Washington Street as well, rather than the meters. It's just, for some people, it's more convenient with the meters, although I think our population says we're accepting the stations rather than the meters. So I'm not opposed to that. I just want to make sure we're carefully considering our older populations as we move forward with that. That's all I have. Any other follow-up board member comments with that?
Yes,
Rebecca?
I guess I do. I have, sorry. The refinancing, I think that's something that we should to move forward on our plate. Basically, that's something that we should. I mean, I think the rates are going to be low for a long time, and as well as you know, if we can look at the TIF, and we can look at actually adding the cost to add a third level on the Bluff Street ramp. I mean, in my mind, just because of the rates and where they are right now, knowing that we're going to need parking in the future, and there's all these things that we want to do, and we could save hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I wholeheartedly agree, Jack, that the financing rates are low now. We have to take advantage of that. Any final comments, Rebecca?
No.
I will deem the meeting adjourned, and thank you again for your attendance. We had a little bit longer meeting, but that's okay. We had some business to conduct, so thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.